before we start making basically fabric bound sketchbooks, this is my collection to date of books that I've made and that I've used for sketchbooks. Right, so we're going to make a book. Like I said, I have made and filled so many of these. I put everything into it, from bits of art that I'm working on, something I need to figure out, if I'm doing any planning for quilts, obviously flamingos, any bits of sketches or anything like that I need to grab hold of. One of the things about these, of course, is you can't be precious about them. You have to actually use them for everything. And because they're relatively cheap to make, cocktails, you make them, you use them, and then you make another one. This is the latest one. This is empty, and this is what we're going to have a look at making. And John has recommended, of course, that we use an A4 size, but that doesn't work for me. I like an A3 size because it's small enough to put in your bag and to carry around with you. I find that the A4 sizes, the A3 size is just a bit too big. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. It's fabric bound. You can bind it with, you can put paper on the cover, but I find fabric actually works better because it's just a bit more durable. It doesn't matter what fabric you use. This is some fabric that I designed and had from just some paperwork that I had done and got it printed up online. But you can use like an old tea towel, an old pillowcase, an old shirt, anything that's not stretchy. But we'll get to the cover in a while. Then inside, the paper, I've stuck random bits here and there. The paper that you use is quite important. I use a thick watercolour paper. We'll get to the paper in a second, but basically from the top, that's what you can see. So there's a number of signatures. Okay, something has just crashed down behind me. I have no idea what that is, but unless the house is falling in, let me just check. Yeah, the house isn't falling in, just something fell off the shelf. So each one of these little sets of folded pages is called a signature. They come together to form a book block, and then the book block you bind into a cover like this. Really durable because it's cardboard cover, covered with fabric, and the whole thing holds together really well. So, how do we make it? Right. I went to Billy's, Mr. Price, that's where I went to, Mr. Price, and I picked up a watercolour pad. It's an A4 pad. Now, a couple of things. You can use any paper, but one of the things to look at really is this is what I'm looking for here, the weight of the paper here. There's only 12 sheets in this, which doesn't seem an awful lot, but it's plenty to make a book. They're 300 grams per square metre, and I think you're best using this kind of paper. If you use thin typing paper type stuff, or typing paper, how old am I? Printer paper, it's going to bleed through, but at least with this you can do your watercolours, you can do whatever, you can hit it with gesso or medium and nothing's going to come through on the other side. The other advantage of that, of course, is it makes a nice thick book, but not so many pages that you get bored, of looking at the cover, so by the time you fill that one, you're ready for a new book. I think this was about £6 or £7 in Mr. Price. The other thing I picked up when I was there was a set of needles. These are actually, I don't know, £1.50 or something, really good deal. And, everybody needs a curved needle and something like that, or something like that every now and again. Basically, you want a darning needle. Now, in this, I'm going to use one like this. It looks like the smallest in the packet, but it doesn't have a wedge-shaped tip, which some of them do. You don't want that because it'll cut the paper. The key thing about it, it's got a big fat eye here on the top, so it's going to make threading and rethreading easier. So we just want that needle. The rest of them I can use for some other day. The other thing I picked up while I was there, dental floss. Now, that's what we're going to use to stitch our book pages together. You can use regular thread. This is way stronger, and so I recommend you do this. Bookbinding, generally, you'll use something like a waxed thread. These are two kinds of waxed threads, one kind of funky multicoloured one and one yellow one. When you get your dental floss, make sure you get waxed dental floss. And the reason is this: when you have a thread like this, it kind of sticks to itself a little bit, and that makes your knots a little bit easier, and it just makes pulling the whole signature, which is the collection of folded pages, better. So you don't have this, but you can get dental floss. So really, dental floss, a needle, a pad of paper, and some glue. Now I'm just using cheapest chips here, general purpose wood glue. It's a standard white PVA. You can use any cheap white PVA. I use wood glue because it's just actually a little bit stronger, and it's what I have. So we'll need that for the second step. For the first step, this is what you need to go out and buy if you don't have these. Other tools that we're going to use is something to fold the paper with. Now, this is a bone folder made from a piece of bone by a lovely friend of mine, but you can buy plastic bone folders. You don't need to, don't actually need to buy one of these. You can go get a butter knife from the kitchen and that'll fold perfectly well. Some kind of Stanley knife, ruler. Now, this is a deadly ruler. On AliExpress, I found that you could buy these metal rulers with a cork back. You don't need a cork back, but they're brilliant because they don't slide on the page at all. But a standard metal ruler to use with your knife is what you need. And then the other thing that you need is something to make holes with. Now, I have this awl, which you can get in a standard hardware shop. You don't have to have one of these. Your trusty darning needle will make holes just fine. But if you've got something like this, it's easier to use. And anyway, everyone should have something like this because they're incredibly useful tools. That's all you need to get started. Okay, so, oh, and something to make marks, but we have plenty of pencils. So we'll set all these things aside for now. And we'll set the dental floss and the needle aside for now, and the bone folder. So with your watercolour paper, now if you can avoid getting one with a wire binding, do, because it's a little bit more effort because you've got to cut off the raggedy edge. I couldn't, these were the only ones I had. So I cut off a few already. So there's perforations here, so of course you can go and tear down perforations, but the whole purpose of what I'm trying to show you here is what are the shortcuts. So if you, instead of tearing down at the perforations, line up your trusty ruler. Make sure your pages are kind of aligned, because with that spiral bound it can sometimes be off a little bit. Line up your ruler with the perforations. Run it down a couple of times with your knife. You'll get a nice clean edge and you'll be able to lift off pages. Now with this thick watercolour paper here, oh, all cut. So this is empty now, right? Don't throw it away, we're going to use this. So there were 12 sheets in this, so I can make 3 signatures of 4 sheets. And remember what I said, a signature is just a nested set of folded pages. Or you could make 4 signatures of 3. I'm lazy, less stitching, so I'm going to make just 3 signatures. So, very straightforward. And I'll have to figure out a way to fast forward this video once I start to this. Fold it in half, get your bone folder, and crease it. Do these one at a time. Now, I'm going to do a set of 4. You don't have to use a folder, but like I said, butter knife works really well. It's nice to get a clean folder. When you start looking up bookbinding online, they're going to tell you all sorts of things about the grain direction and this, that, and the other. But you know, this is just a quick and dirty guide to bookbinding, so you don't need to worry unduly about that kind of stuff. So this is our 4th of 4. And they're sort of aligned. So we've got 4 bent in half, and just nest them together, stack them up, one inside the other. Now, the first thing to notice, which is a disadvantage of using watercolour paper, is when you stack up your signature like this, because the paper is thick, you get the innermost piece of folded paper sort of protruding the furthest out. Now, you can leave that. You don't actually have to do anything with that. If you want a kind of an arty edge, that's fine. And to be honest, when you start filling up a book, you're going to have all sorts of bits, well, if you're like me, stuck in, so they're going to be sticking out anyway. Oh, that's the original design for the piece of fabric I had printed up for this one. But if you want, you can even that out. And I'll show you how to do that if that's what you want. So just get them nicely aligned. Back with our metal ruler again, and line it up at the very edge of the outside-most one. You don't want to remove much paper, you just want to trim it up, make it nice and even. Make sure your blade is sharp, because of course, as we know, nothing like paper for blunting blades. So if it's a snap-off blade, snap off the blades and get as even or as uneven as you wish. Good enough for me. It's not perfect, but I'm happy with it. So now it's even and level. So you'll do that with the other signatures as well. Now, because there's only 3, and because I hope I can figure out how to edit this video a little bit so you're not looking at endless paper folding, I'll do the rest of them here, because I have, of course, the one I've made earlier. Now, while I'm finishing off this. The other thing is, with these kinds of journals, the fatter one, that's one signature I had done earlier, that's a second, that's a third. So my sketchbook's going to be about that thick when it's all done. Now, it starts that thick, but again, once you start adding things to it, this is a better example. Once you start adding things into it, it'll get thicker and thicker and thicker. So that has a lot of stuff, additional stuff stuck into it. So it's okay for you to just start with a small number of signatures because it does get quite a bit thicker. So I want to show you one that I didn't make, somebody else made, but just to show you that with these you can bind anything in. This is one that somebody sent me, and it's just got all sorts of, oh, it's upside down. It's called a junk journal, and it's got literally junk. It's got pages from magazines, it's got junk mail, in this case old patterns, and you can sort of stick and bind anything that you want into this. Oh, even a piece of felt. So, and then of course draw on top of it if you wish. One of the things that I frequently do with mine, once I've got to this stage here, is I get a nice pretty piece of scrapbooking paper and I'll cut one more piece and wrap it around here so that each of my signatures has something wrapped around. So basically you'll see, if you look at it from the top, there's a lot more signatures than this, but each signature is wrapped around with a coloured bit of paper. So it just means that as you flick through the book, you've got some nice random bits of paper that appear here and there. Not in any way necessary to do. So, first step, we have our 3 signatures together to make a book block. Now, we need to stitch them. So now we have our nice folded signatures here. So the next thing we want to do is we need to mark them. Now, it doesn't actually matter. These spacings here, they're not set. You can go with whatever marks you like, which is why I said the accurate measurements from here to here don't matter so much. I like to have an odd number of marks because these are going to be where the holes are going to go for the stitching. I'm going to mark them with a dark pen so that you can see where they have to go. What matters though is that whatever holes you put in here, wherever you put the spaces for the holes, that you do the exact same in all of the signatures, which is why it actually really helps to have it on another piece of paper. So for my next signature, I'll lay that down. I have this stitched already, so we'll get to that in a minute, but I'll mark in the exact same locations as well, because when you stack up all the signatures here, we need to be able to travel from one hole directly to the next so that we can stitch through. We'll get to that. For now, we mark on our paper, then we open it up so that the whole thing is laid flat, and then lined up. And then we use our trusty awl to poke holes through at each one of these. Now, this is where I said, instead of the awl, you could use your darning needle to poke a hole through like that. It's just, it takes a little bit more effort. With the awl, because you can push it more, it's just a bit easier. Fold it back up and you'll see that there are actually little holes that have come through on the inside as well. Now, this is where your dental floss and your needle comes in. One of the things about the amount of thread that you should put on your needle, it shouldn't really be longer, roughly longer than about the distance from your hand to your elbow. Now that seems ridiculously short. You can maybe go maybe 50% longer than that. But the reasons for that are longer pieces of thread tend to get knotted more, and when something gets knotted, it's a total pain in the ass, and you've got to go and unknot everything and cut stuff out, and it's pain. Shorter pieces of thread are actually more efficient overall. So you thread up your dental floss and you start sewing. Now, I've sewn these 2 signatures already with dental floss, but it's not shown up well enough in the camera, so I'm actually going to switch from the dental floss, just so you can see properly what I'm doing, to a piece of this waxed cotton thread here so that you can see it better against the white. When you go and order in your lovely cork-backed metal rulers in AliExpress, order some waxed thread as well. This is the kind of thread that they use for leatherwork, and it's cheap as chips. Start from the inside at one end. So I'm going to start at this end and work this way because I'm right-handed. It just works a bit easier for me, but really it doesn't matter which way you start. So you'll see the little hole inside because they all came through. So push your needle through, all the way through, until it's coming out this side. If I put something white underneath, you can probably see all of this a lot better. There we go. So the needle is coming through like that. So disadvantage of cotton thread is it's actually harder to pull through the signatures. So leave yourself a tail of about 5 centimeters or so. From the front, go into the next hole, so it's where your next mark is. So poke it through the hole. You don't actually have to put holes in it at all. If your darning needle is sharp enough, you can just drive straight on, but it's a bit easier. So that one's through. Pull it all the way so that the thread is flat here. And then what you want to do at this point is you want to just make a knot. So I'm going to knot these together. Just your standard, ideally a square knot, but since I have a complete inability to do a square knot, a granny knot will have to do. So I have a knot and a tail, and that's fine. So I'm going to move on to, and it's all fairly secure even at this point. So I'm going to move on to the next hole in the row, so that happens to be the one in the middle. Push my needle through. Now, you've got a couple of options here. You can go into the next one and out the top as a kind of a running stitch, so you're basically going in alternate holes, but I like to make it fairly secure. So I'm going to go back into the one that I came out of first. So if you can see, this is the first one that I did. Now look here, this is kind of typical. I didn't manage to make the hole right down on the edge here. It's up here by a couple of mil, so that line is a bit slanted, but that's fine, don't worry about it. So I'm going to go back into the hole here, the second one. Push it through. Keep it tight. Out this one again. Then I'm going to go into the next one. So this makes it more like a back stitch. If you remember learning back stitch at school when you were sewing in that one, and it going back. So I'm going to end up with a full line of stitching on both sides. Now, it really doesn't matter how you stitch these. Go in and out as many holes as you want, in whatever order you wish, just all the while trying to keep everything fairly secure. Try not to stick a needle in your fingers, because it does hurt. A lot of crafts require blood sacrifices, so don't be surprised if you bleed on your books. Now I've got to the end, kind of covered everything here, covered everything on the inside. So what I want to do is I want to tie it off. Now be careful about pulling the thread too far this way, because what you can do, it's less of an issue with these thicker papers, but thinner papers, you can basically rip it down here. Again, if that happens, just keep going. You can cover that up with glue. So I want to tie this off. So I'm going to go under this piece of thread here. Happens to be 2. Go under that, like that. So that's just finishing it. And now I'm just going to make a knot here. So I'm going to go under this one and come out through the loop that I've made. Just want to tie it off. I want to make it, turn it into a knot of some kind. You don't need to be precious about what kind of knot. Make a knot. So that's one. I'm going to do it twice just to make it really secure. So I've gone through, gone underneath, and I've just gone through the loop that it's made. Tight. Right, so that's the first signature, okay? And it's actually really secure. The book is really properly secure at this point. Now I'm going to stop here just to show you. There are a couple of bookbinding techniques that don't involve glue. I like to use glue in my books. So there's this one, which is a Japanese edge stitched. And what you have is you've got a separate cover, and then you've got each, in this case, their signatures. But the reason I have gone away from this is one of my early ones, as you can see, it's quite gappy. It's actually quite loose. So the whole book ends up to be really quite loose. That was a junk journal. There's another form of these, which is kind of funky as well, where again it's just stitched, and then I've taken some stitching over. This is just a piece of suede. Go around your charity shops or your old suede coats, and you don't need to glue anything on. And again, it's nice with just a little piece of suede around the edge. I use this as a travel journal. It's fine, it's good. But after that I started moving to these other heavy card ones, because they just feel a lot more stable, and you've got a nice heavy surface or a flat surface that you can lean on to work on. So that's our first signature done. And if you go online, you'll find loads of different stitching patterns, but I basically just go in and out of holes and make it as secure as I can. So you take your second signature, stack it on top of the first signature, and you'll see that all your holes will align. So I'm not at the edge here, I'm sort of one in. It doesn't actually really matter where you start. You'll find that I don't worry overly much about it doing it perfectly. So I'm just going to go in the hole straight above the one that I'm at here. Now I'm running out of thread here, so I'm just going to come out in any one close by like this. Now this is where it gets a bit tricky, and this is where there's actual proper bookbinding knots, which I don't know what they are. But what we have, I'm just going to loosen it up so you can see what we have. We have one signature that's fully stitched, and then from that the piece of thread has gone up into this hole and out this hole here. So I'm going to pull that tight, back down again like that. Now you want to keep these tight together, so holding them fairly securely in your hand, we want to get this thread and secure it off the signature that's at the bottom. So this is the top signature, this is the signature at the bottom. So again, I'm going underneath the thread that runs between this hole and this hole in the bottom signature. Going underneath it, I'm coming out, and I'm going to make some kind of a knot and pull it really tight. So underneath, and there's a little loop here that's formed as I start to pull it through that loop. So just put my needle back into it and pull it tight again. Do that a couple of times. I'll do it 3 times just to be on the safe side. And what you'll find, and this is where wax thread is great because it doesn't slip. So this is now bonded relatively tightly to that one. So these two are bonded quite close together. Now I'm out of thread, so I'm going to just get another piece, and I am going to tie these 2 pieces together. I'm going to tie it so that the knot is sitting quite low down in the thread, because I don't want to tie it at the end of this knot, or at the end of this piece of thread, because then I'll be trying to poke the knot through a hole, and that's just not going to work out very well for me. So I'm going to tie the knot again, granny knot, quite close down to this hole here. And don't worry about all these tails of string, they're fine. I actually do. I don't even know how you do a square knot. Might be why I can't do it. Anyway, so it's well knotted on here. Just going to thread it, thread my needle. Needle threaders exist, by the way. Wax thread's a bit easier to thread because it's fairly rigid. So, and we keep going. So I'm going to go up to the next, I'm going to go back in the hole that I just came out of in the top signature, like that. So there's only 1 piece in so far. It's a little bit looser than I like, but don't worry about that. It'll all tighten up as you go. But keep it as tight as you can as you go. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Come out again. There we go. So again, we're coming out in the signature above this hole here. So pull that out. And again, I just want to tie it off as well as I can. So I'm holding it, these 2 quite close together. Putting my needle under the thread that's in the bottom signature. Pulling it out a bit. And in the loop that's created, so that the thread is coming from the top signature, it's making a loop and going under the thread in the bottom signature. I'm just going to pop my needle back through that and pull it tight. And I will do that a few times. Again, I'm always going for the same direction, that might be less confusing. So I'm going underneath that thread and then through the loop that's created and just pulling it tight. I'll do it once more. Underneath the thread, and then I'm putting my needle back through. Do it with my left hand so my arms aren't in the way. My needle is coming back through and I'm pulling it tight. And really I'm pulling it quite tight. So then do that a couple of times. I've just done 3, but 2 or 3 is good. Put your, back to the center, we'll go back in the hole at the top signature because we want to do the same over here. Now we haven't done it down here, so I'm going to have to travel back to do that. But like I said, in and out wherever you fancy until you're happy and secure enough. In and out the top. In the end, unlike this one, we're actually going to glue the binding, which brings everything together and makes it super secure. So underneath the thread that's holding the bottom signature together, and out through the loop, underneath the thread, through the loop, just pull it really tight. So, actually happy that that's really secure. Now, of course, I could just bring my thread straight down here and stitch this one, but I'll be happier, as I always am, if I put a bit more stitching in, because I feel it just makes everything more secure. So I'm just going to travel down with a kind of a running stitch. So I'm going back in the one I was working on, out through the second one. And while I'm here, should you know what, we may as well add another little knot here, because it'll do no harm at all. And now it brings us down as far as the middle one, so we're going there. And we'll come out number 4. And I definitely want another note here, because that was where I started, and often the starting point when you're travelling initially from the bottom signature to the next signature is often quite loose. So I'm definitely going to add another knot here. So again, I'm going up under here, through the gap, tying it off, up under, and tie it off. And that allows me to go back in the hole I was working from, which is the 4th one, and out the last one, which is the one that hadn't been secured yet. So out the last one, and we just do the exact same. So this is the last one, so here, and we'll make a few knots. There's 1 knot, 2 knots, and you know what, we'll make a 3rd one. I know my thread's getting short again, but we can always add more. Right, so what we have now are these 2 signatures really secure, really well tied together. So you keep going. So we go to this signature. Now this is one I'd already sewn together with dental floss, but like I said, we couldn't see it. It just wasn't visible on the camera, so I'm going to continue. I'll leave that stuff in there. It's already stitched, so it's keeping it fairly secure. So we have a book block. Now what you'll find, which it's part of the artistic process, shall we say, because, you know, the stitching is a bit variable, these haven't maybe lined up exactly the way they could, you're going to get little irregularities here. You can decide whether you want those irregularities, or you can just go back in with your trusty ruler and trim them all so they're exactly even. Me, I'm quite happy when they're regular, because I know it's going to get much more regular once I start filling it up. So I'm happy with that. Now before we look at putting any glue on and making this whole area messy, remember I said not to throw away the empty cover of the notebook you've used, because we want this piece of card, because we're going to make the cover for the whole thing out of that piece of card there. So we're going to cut it off. We're going to try and cut it off. There's no perforation, so we're going to try and cut it off as close to the comb binding here as we can to get as much card out of it as possible. Now you are going to need 1 small additional piece of card. You can use any kind of card, of course, but I figure if they're giving you a nice lovely piece of card that matches the shape of the pages and the size of the pages you've got, then definitely use it. This bit now, I guess I can throw it away. So this is going to be part of our cover, and it fits perfectly, because obviously it was already the cover, so I'm going to cut that in half, but use that in a while. So before we get to that, let's talk about actually gluing this up. I'm going to trim these ends just a small bit so they're not all over the place. Don't trim them too short, but just get them out of the road. Now, at this point all you need is glue, but a couple of things that are really useful are a couple of pocket protectors like this, because if you're like me and you're very messy with glue, it stops the glue going everywhere. Or you could use tin foil or baking parchment, or just a piece of plastic bag to be fine. And the other thing that's really useful to hold everything together are some kind of clamps. Clothes pegs will work grand. I use bulldog clips, because what we want to do is we want to, if you can see, because of the way the stitching is pulled, and because I'm not perfect at stitching, there can be sometimes a little bit of misalignment, so you can kind of push that in place, which is why it helps to have the clamps. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a really thick layer of glue here, and we're going to let that set overnight, because, as we said, with some of these books that aren't glued, so this is an example of one that's not glued that I showed you, you get gaps appearing here between the signatures, because over time all of these threads are going to stretch a little bit. But when you have them glued, which is a bit later in my iterations of making books, the gaps, you don't get gaps between signatures. So this is, I wrap my signatures or some of them in paper, but you can see there's actually a line of glue here, but it doesn't open the whole book up, which is great. It sort of stays really nice and neat together. A couple of thoughts as well. At this point here with this book block, I've seen a lot of online artists use it like this, because if you wanted to do this page, you can open it flat. If you wanted to use this page, you can pull the whole thing back and work on this page, because there's no cover on it. And then presumably when the whole thing is filled, you can then put it in a nice cover and store it. If you're going to do that, don't work on the front and the back pages. We're going to put a cover on it, but the junk journal that I showed you earlier, instead of making a cover, she's actually used a cover from an existing book. So she's taken an existing hardback book, ripped out the book block, and all she's done is made a book block like this, put it in the cover, and literally put a piece of tape on here to stick them together. She's done that on the front, and she's done it on the back, 2 pieces of very strong tape, and that's it. Job done in that particular case. I like to cover my own because I like to use my own fabrics, so I'm basically making the cover of a hardback book. You can do whatever works for you. So I'm going to wrap this plastic around sort of close to the top. Just try and avoid me making it too messy. So if I use 2 of these poly pockets and then clamp it. So like I said, you could use a clothes peg to kind of hold it there. I'm just going to use a bulldog clip because I have them and they're just a little bit stronger. So we want the plastic basically in line or as close to this edge as possible here. So wrap that around. And the reason I use the plastic, like I said, is just I'm fierce messy when it comes to glue, so it stops it all getting covered in glue. So that's sealed on there. And I'm going to wrap it around the back end here. This is what we're going to be needing overnight just to dry out. Tuck away the excess however you can, and wrap the other one around like that as well. And try and line it. Try and line it as much as you can. That's why I like the bulldog clips, because you can force it into some amount of alignment. Right, so now what we have is we've an exposed edge here, and everything else is a bit protected. So take your trusty wood glue and hope that it's not all sealed off, that you can get some glue out of it, and put a very generous dollop of glue all the way along the spine, like this. I'm going to use a paintbrush and just work it in a second, but you want a fair amount of it. It will go down a small bit between the pages, but when you have it clamped like this, it stops it going too far down into the pages. So I will just use a paintbrush and sort of persuade it to go in a little bit like that, smooth it out, make it a bit. I've maybe been a small bit generous here with the glue, but sure, look, I'll take some of it away. But we want a good sort of solid coating of glue. One of the reasons why it's nicer to use wood glue for this, oh my god, I have used far too much glue. See what I said about being messy at gluing? One of the things about using wood glue as opposed to regular cheap glue is it's just thicker, viscosity is higher, so it doesn't go everywhere, she says, laughing hollowly as she wipes it up because it has gone absolutely everywhere. Okay, there we go, without making too much of a mess. That's the book block glued up. So leave that somewhere where it's not going to fall over. Close pegs, by the way, incredibly handy to make things stand up. Leave it where it shouldn't fall over too much, and leave it overnight to dry. So as I said to you guys, this whole bookbinding thing is kind of like a 2-stage process. There's a bit of an overnight step in it, and but while you're waiting for one overnight step, you may as well do the 2 steps that need an overnight dry together and leave them both. So this is the cover that we had. So we want to cut it in half. Cutting that's really handy. So that's, I need to figure out where the center point is. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 5, 10, 15. So that's the center line here. So I'm just going to cut it down on this center line using my knife. Now, this is going to be the book, but we need a spine. This book cover, we need a spine. So if you have a look here, this will be the inside cover here. I'm going to cover it with fabric. This will be the back cover, but we need some kind of a spine. Now, one of the things to notice here is, if you can see, this spine here is longer than the thickness of the book block. And I do that deliberately because if you see some of my other books where I haven't done that, the whole thing starts to kind of swell up a bit because I've put so much stuff. Like this is, you can see the way the signature is actually curved right around because there's so much stuff in there. So it's really helpful to, this is better example of how the whole book kind of swells because you start to put so much stuff in it. So actually, if you make the spine a little bit wider than the thickness of the book block, the whole thing should actually hold together just a little bit better, like I've done here. It still looks very neat. It's not essential, but I think, you know, what we're looking at here, we're looking at maybe a couple of mil wider or so. So we have a book block, and I have another piece of grey cardboard. Now it's a little bit too wide, so I'm going to just notch it or take it down just by about 1/2 centimetre, because looking at the thickness of the book block, which I am not touching because somebody put glue all over it, it's just going to be a little bit too wide. So I'm going to take it down about 3/4 centimetre. Somebody put glue all over my ruler as well. I think that would do. Most essential things: biodegradable baby wipes. Use them by the boatload. So this is going to be my spine, and this is going to be my other. Now what could you use for this? You could use a cereal box. Cereal box cardboard's a bit too thin, so maybe if you use a cereal box, put 2 layers together and just glue them just to make it a little bit more sturdy. Or just cut a strip off another sketchbook that you're not using, and use that. Now you can see that's just a little bit too long. So let me just get the length of that right as well, because this was just a scrap piece of cardboard that I had. So I'm going to take off just the end. Okay. So now that's my 3 parts of my book cover. Front cover, back cover, spine. So I'm going to cover it with something. I'm just going to use this piece of fabric. Sky's the limit really with fabric. Try and use some, somebody put glue all over my oil as well. Try and use something that's woven, so cotton, polyester, something that doesn't have a stretch. And this is kind of a funky galaxy glittery fabric. Yes, of course I should have ironed it, but I didn't. Like I said, an old shirt. Pennies have really funky tea towels. You could use one of those. You could use a pillowcase. You could use just something plain white and painted. And you could use paper. So lay it right side down. And then we want to lay out where the book block is going to be, or not the book block, the cover is going to be, just to make sure we've got enough fabric. Now I actually have too much fabric here. There's a lot of excess on either side. So I'm just going to rip it down a little bit to make it a bit smaller. Because you don't want to be tackling loads of excess fabric, it just, everything gets in the way. So that's about big enough. Now you might notice as I'm laying this up, I'm leaving a little gap of about 1 mil to 2 mil between, just as I'm lining this up, and I'll glue it in the same way, between the spine and the cover. Strictly speaking, that gap should be exactly the thickness of the piece of cardboard, because when you fold it up like this, you want that gap will close up. I just eyeball it. Now this is too wide, so I'm just going to take a little piece off at the end by ripping it. So I don't need that piece. And how are we lengthwise? Well, again, still looking maybe a little bit long. I want probably an overlap of about that much, kind of 2 centimetres or so. So it is coming up a little bit long in the length, so I'm just going to take a bit off here at the end as well. Right there, happy enough with that. Now, back to our glue. So we want a load of glue. Use your paintbrush, or what actually works really well for spreading glue is an old card. So use an old credit card to spread the glue like that, or an old library card or whatever, and then it does actually allow you to return the extra back in. So we want to glue both covers and the spine as well. It's okay, I'm getting glue in the fabric, that's fine, it's going to get covered in glue in a minute. There's way too much glue here, so the other card is really helpful to return it back into the bottle. Put the nozzle on, people. Don't be like me. So cover it with glue. Plenty of glue is okay. Now flip it over. I want to line it up so that we have a decent gap all around. keep it, make sure it's nice and flat and you haven't introduced any wrinkles underneath. So if it's nice and flat, no wrinkles underneath, press it down. Messy. Spine, leaving that little gap I showed you, about 1 to 2 mil. Line it up as best you can. Glue it down. Again, make sure there's no wrinkles or anything like that underneath. And then the front, in this case, little gap. Glue it down, make sure there's no wrinkles. And then back to the trusty wet wipes to get the glue. See, when you look at these on YouTube, they don't have glue everywhere. But that could be the power of editing. Now, at this point here, we want to fold these in and glue them as well. But we're going to have fabric here at the corners. If I fold here and fold here, I've got a lot of excess fabric. We want to cut that off. If you do this properly, and I have singularly failed to do so, you should be able to cut off your fabric at a 45 degree angle here, and then when you fold them you get like a perfect mitered corner. That never works for me. So I tend to instead cut a kind of sort of a 40, I'm going to draw it actually on this piece of fabric so that you can see the sort of shape that I make when I cut. Instead of this lovely 45 degree angle, which would be straight down here, I do a kind of a curved one, like that. So it's minimizing the amount of fabric in the corners, but not the exact 45. The 45 would be like that. I just end up with a small bit of extra fabric here. And the reason that works, and I'm using a rotary cutter, but you can use a scissors. The reason this seems to work a bit better is because it just gets rid of a lot of the bulk, but gives me a little extra, and of course I'm eyeballing it. It gives me a little bit of extra so that I have something to cover over mistakes with. A bit more fabric on this side, but look, hey, we'll work with it. Do me scoopy thing. Sort of a scoopy thing on this side. Okay. Now what we want is more glue. Hey. Let's come up a bit, so just let that back down. Because we want to glue all this down. So I still have a bit of glue left in my credit card. So I'm just going to put glue all the way along here before I go back to the bottle of doom. It's okay if it comes down a bit, because we're going to just leave this overnight. Fold that down. Pull it sort of nice and taut. Might want to just push this down here. Plenty of glue. If you haven't got plenty of glue, put more glue on. So fold down all of the corners like that. My glue nozzle is clogged, so I'm going to risk the bottle again. So put a bit of extra down here so I can use it with my card. Spray the glue down. Now what you want at this corner here is there's going to be a tiny bit of an overlap, and that's okay, because it to me just makes a neater finish. So bring this up here and futz the corners until you're happy. What I tend to do is take a little bit of glue and I just kind of push it in here into the corners so that it's nice and wet. Keep that down and pull it down like that. Now, like I said, if you can make perfectly mitered corners, I'll be dead impressed and incredibly jealous. But you just want to get it away like that so that it's sort of flat, and you try and get any bit of excess fabric pushed down. Yeah, that's not bad. And then we want to do the same down here. Now I don't feel I've got enough glue down here because we want all of this flattened down. So plenty of glue down here. And then a little bit of glue into the corner because I really think it helps. Makes the fabric a little bit more amenable because it's wetter, so it's folding a bit better. And then futz away that corner until you kind of get the little extra bit tucked in. Oh, feck it, I forgot I want to glue all the way down this bottom line as well before I fold that section down. Messy, messy, messy. There's glue everywhere, including on me. So fold this up, getting that corner tucked, keep it nice and flat, smoothing out any potential wrinkles you might have, which you wouldn't have if you ironed your fabric first. No judgment here. And the same with the last side. Again, I want to spot a glue into the corners to this corner here and that corner up the top. And pull it in nice and tight. Make sure it's neat in all the corners, because that's what you want. You just want it looking nice. Okay. Add a little bit of glue here, because I don't think there's enough on my hands and everywhere else. It's okay to put glue on the fabric. Remember, it's white glue, it's going to dry clear. So, that's all pretty secure. Actually, credit card wouldn't be a bad idea, just to, between this groove here, just make sure that fabric is nicely bonded down, top and bottom there, to itself. So what you have is a nicely covered book cover. So looking at it from the other side, I'll check away all the extra bits. It's going to look like that. Now, there's a little bits come through, but that's okay. You won't see it once it's dried. So this is going to be our book cover. Looks quite nice. We need to let this dry, and you are definitely better if you weight it down. You can leave it dry open like this, with glue everywhere. I like to use a couple of more of these pocket protectors, not pocket protectors, poly pockets, document protectors. Just lay it down in line with one of these. Flip the whole lot over like this. And then pop another one down on top. So, you know, when you're Mr. Price, you pick up a packet of these as well. Put another one on the bottom. Like that. Then go for a hardback book. Like that, on a flat surface. And a weight. A stack of books is good, but if you've got one of these cool vintage weights, use that. And leave it overnight. Now, I haven't sort of wrapped this whole completely in plastic. There's plastic at the top and the bottom and in the middle. The plastic in the middle is essential, because if you're like me with glue everywhere, you'll end up sticking the two halves of the book cover together if you don't put some plastic in the middle. Leave that overnight, leave your book block overnight, and then tomorrow we'll do the final step, which is quick, just to glue them all together. Okay, so we're back the next day, so let's have a look at how things have dried. Move these. So this is our cover. These, just keep them for next time you're making a book. So our cover is all nicely dry, and more importantly, quite flexible. You know, these parts here where we've made this, left this little gap here, it folds nice and neat. So that's the cover. And then the glue has all dried clear, which is what we wanted. I'll just get rid of all this. This clamp. Put them to the side. And I'll show you how everything gets put together. So we've got the book block, and now it's really sort of solid and stable together, and that glue is really helping. If you want to trim off some of these bits, you can, but I won't bother. So it's going to sit into our cover like that. So that's going to be our book. And like I said, we did deliberately keep this spine large. Now it's possibly a little bit large for that, but it depends on how much stuff you're going to stick in. So what we need is one last piece of paper. What we don't want is this spine here, where we had already got glue on, which is dry, to be glued to this bit here. So that those two, they sit together, but they're not glued together. But we do want basically something that's going to hold all of this here. So it might be easiest to do it rather than tell you about it. So what we want is another piece of paper. Now I've used some scrapbooking paper. So scrapbooking paper is nice, solid paper. It comes in nice designs, and it comes in these 12 by 12 sheets. And I've cut this piece out already, because what we want is we want a piece that's going to fit on the cover here. So we just see like a little edge all the way around, and then come over the book block by a couple of centimetres. 3 centimetres, maybe something like that. And we're simply going to glue that in place. Now, because I have left this a little bit large, the spine, it's gluing it down is going to be a bit more difficult, because we're having to try and sort of force it together. So what I'm going to do is just manually round this out a little bit, basically by brute force of ignorance, just making it, bending it a small bit, so it's making the spine itself a bit more flexible. If you haven't made your cover spine bigger than the book block, you won't have to do this, but that just gives me a little bit more flexibility. Not the correct way, obviously, you round out spines, but fine. So book block laid down. So this line here is how we line up the book block, and obviously line it up top and bottom, so we're happy with everything. And then this is going to go on here. Now I'm going to bring this over here. Like I said, I'm forcing this down a little bit, but you mightn't have to. I want to see where my fold goes, so I'll have about this much, which is about 3 centimeters overlapping. So I'm just going to mark that a little bit here with my finger so that I can actually fold it back, crease it back nicely. So it's about here. So I'm going to fold that back on itself, right sides together, give it a decent crease. And what I'm going to do is simply put glue all over the back of this piece. Glue it to here, pull up the cover and glue that to there. And then we'll do the same in the back and then hold it together. So let's have a go at doing that. I've cut another piece from the back. It's a different design paper, and that's actually cut that a bit bigger because I wanted to have the entire happily ever after bit on there, so it's going to project a little bit further on this page. This is why I said to you before, you can stop at this point and use this as a sketchbook, and it has the advantage if you're doing painting work or whatever. You can line it flat, you can bend it on itself, you can do all that, and then bind it subsequently. But if you're going to do that, don't do anything on the front cover, don't do anything on the back cover, because you will be gluing these extra bits of paper onto it. So let's get some glue. The glue I used the last time, I wasn't entirely happy with it, was super runny. So let's see if I can get any glue out of this. This is a tacky glue, and it's much less runny, which is really helpful. So I'm just gluing, like I said, on this one side here, not the spine. The spine doesn't get any glue. So I'm going to be quite careful not to put it over onto the spine. Spread this through. Again, remember this dries clear, so you don't have to worry about if you smear it or if you go over the edge where the paper is going to line up. So I'm lining it fairly carefully along here. And I'm going to put my piece of paper down. That's going to get glue so I can put the sticky down. And the folded edge lines up with the gap between the front cover, just that tiny little gap we left down here. Lines up, stick it down quite well. Now, this is what I said. It doesn't matter that I've got extra glue. It's going to dry clear, so we're not going to see it in any case. Make that as neat or as unneat as you care to do. And then this piece here needs glue. Now, I don't want to get glue in here because it's just going to make a hell of a mess. So I'm just going to put that down to avoid getting glue on there. Like I said, any PVA will be fine, but I'm just using stuff a bit more viscous simply because I made such a mess the last time. On my cover. Oh, come on. This is the problem with this stuff. It is quite stiff. There's glue. So plenty of glue on there. Spread it out with my trusty credit card. And then the book block gets sat onto that. Now I've got some glue on here, so I'm going to remove all of this before I put down the book block because I don't want this to stick to this bit. I only want it to stick to the flap. So again, try and line it out. Line it up fairly carefully, just along the edge, until you're happy that it is in place. It's sort of sitting nicely on the top, sitting nicely on the bottom, and it's lined up like that on the side. So, one half, do the exact same for the other half, and we're all done. Now, because there's this extra glue here, got it on the page already, I'm just going to whack in one of these document protectors in place, just so that, again, I'll leave this dry overnight. And we want more glue over here. Actually, do you know what? I didn't fold this, so I need to line this up as well and figure out where the fold is going to be. And the fold is going to be in line with this, again, this gap between the spine and the edge. Get that folded sharply, because it does help. Sharp folds, because it makes it much easier to line everything up. And then we can cover this bit in glue. Like that. Spread it out. This actually is really good. You can get it on Amazon, and it's really good if you're doing any model making or anything like that. Same formulation as the regular wood glue or any kind of standard PVA. It's just this one is a little bit, it goes off a bit faster, and it's a little bit stickier. So rather than having to wait for ages to hold two things together, it actually goes off really fast. So I'll glue this down, lining this fold up with the edge of the cover. And here, thing about glue as well is press it well down, because in that spreading it, we're going to get much better adhesion. I'm going to put this back in again just to protect it as I glue up this flap. Glue over here. Spread it out. And then I'm just going to close the book over in itself, and this will stick to this. These pocket protectors here, I've got glue on this already. You don't need to throw them away. That glue will dry, and it'll be perfectly usable. Just you need to put it somewhere it's not going to stick to everything. So I'm going to close the book now. Like I said again, remember this cover is a bit bigger, so I'm having to fuss it a little bit just to kind of push it down into place, because I want the fold lined up with the edge of my book block. But if you're making the spine that's the same size as the block, that's not going to be an issue for me. So rounding that slightly, make it look pretty. And there we have it. Put another one of those document protectors in just to keep it all clean. And we have a notebook. So how it works, obviously let it dry before I start to use it. This piece of paper that you put in holds everything together. It's all that holds it together, incidentally. So that's why sometimes when a book's binding is broken, it's just something like that. You can use tape. You can use anything else. But really, if you use a decent heavyweight piece of paper, like the scrapbooking paper, which you get in cool colours and stuff, it's plenty good enough, plenty heavy enough. And you have your book to fill with wonderful things. I'll probably just put that weight back on that. Just to show you how I'm going to line up that weight. So again, I want to line it up and leave the spine sort of sticking out, because like I said, my spine is a little bit bigger than it needs to be. If I line it up with the spine sticking out and put a weight on here, that's going to keep everything in really good contact as it dries. And there you go.